So here I am, bad light, bad hair day. My name is Ori Shibi. We are going to talk here about sponsorship, project sponsorship. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. And again, for the last time, I apologize for that technical difficulty. No camera anymore. In any case, we just minimize stuff because I know it's going to be on the screen. I'm going to minimize and I'm going to keep it like that without presentation mode, so you don't have any shadows on the screen. And lastly, I'll turn off the camera. So Ori Shibi here. I have been doing a lot of project management related work for way too long. I just lost that sense of time this year. And it involved business analysis work, agile, organizational change. And I'll say probably in the last 6-7 years, I have been dealing more and more with the area involving project sponsorship. And what was it? I think 2014, I spoke at some conference, and then shortly after, I got contacted by a couple of companies that told me that there's very little literature out there about sponsorship and sponsorship issues. And I also started noticing through my work and through training that unfortunately, many problems that project managers face actually come from the area of project sponsorship. And people sometimes told me in classes, you know, it's not me who should be here. It's not me who should be here, but rather, sorry about that, rather it's my manager, my sponsor. Since then, I've done work related to how to improve the practice of project sponsorship. Notable organizations that I did work with was American Express, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? Two more recent ones that we were dealing with as far as that. We improved the practices, and that brought us to that presentation today that deals with how to deal with difficult sponsors. Now, of course, there are no difficult people in the world, right? Everybody's easy to get along with, but let's really talk about what we can do when the situation with the sponsorship is not ideal. So again, I wanted to take Project Management Association of Canada and Procept and Title Shift and Kevin Aguano for arranging all that and allowing me to be here. Let's get on our way. Right now, a couple of objectives, talk about the importance and the need for effective sponsorship, foster healthy environment for project management success, and a lot of it comes from the sponsor, apply concepts to increase the sponsorship effectiveness around us, and then improve collaboration between the PM and the sponsor. I also apparently wrote a book about project sponsorship. And actually, it was Project and Change Sponsorship. It's a fairly recent book. It came out a couple of months ago. It's my 4th book. And it's called Effective Project and Change Sponsorship. Because apparently the role of the sponsor in change initiatives and in projects is quite often quite similar. I know that you've been sitting in front of computer screens the whole day and whatnot, but if possible, I will ask for some participation on your part. Even if you're muted, it's okay. Feel free to type into the chat and I will monitor the chat. Of course, the price is going to be that it's going to be a little bit of a shadow on the screen. Sean, is that the reason you raised your hand? Interesting. Probably, but every time I open the chat box, that's the reason that I wasn't on presentation mode before. You will have a shadow on the screen, so I will try not to do it too much, but at the same time, I will monitor the chat window just to make sure that if somebody is typing anything in there, I can respond. We're going to go for 45 minutes. Of course, I'm going to allow questions. If there are any questions throughout, again, feel free in any way. also through the chat or through raising your hand. Otherwise, I will allow some time at the end of the session. So this is how we're going to break it down. What is sponsorship? A couple of challenges around project failures and how it connects back, of course. The partnership between the sponsor and the project manager. I'm going to refer, this is going to be where we talk about the different types of sponsors, including the so-called quote unquote difficult ones. And then a couple of other things that it's almost like tips for sponsors, but actually it's also tips for the project managers on maybe gently coaching their sponsor so they can become more effective in what they do. So here we are. Sponsorship thoughts. When I say sponsorship, what comes to mind, right? I mean, are you happy in general with what you get from your sponsor? Do you feel that your sponsor is too involved, not involved enough, meddling a little bit too much, right? Again, it's their project. Remember, we are here just to do the work. How do you feel is the level of, what do you feel about the level of impact that sponsors have on project success? So anybody wants to chime in? I see a chat, I open, not involved enough, I hear. Thank you, Adila. Yeah, so it's quite common, right? When you see sponsors that essentially they hand it over to you at some point very early on. I had sponsors like that. My boss told me, hey, Ori, I see that now the project is in good hands, so my door is always open. And I was very impressed initially, only to realize later that the door was open because my boss was never there, so I could not get any support, right? So definitely the ones who are not involved enough, not realizing that the project manager has only so much decision-making capacity within the confines of the mandate given by the sponsor. But whenever it's beyond our pay grade, the sponsor has to be there. I alone cannot accept or reject change requests until I have authorization from the sponsor. Sponsor is too critical of the project manager. That's another one. Thank you, Karen. Also, and too critical, it's also bearing down a little bit too much, expecting us to do things that are not possible, or involve too much. So I will even read it as sometimes micromanaging, right? So long story short, we can see that unfortunately, project sponsorship is not done the way we need it to. So it does not, that whole discipline of sponsorship does not provide us with sufficient, us as in PMs, with sufficient support to actually do our work properly. Decisions are not made or not made on time. Mandates are not clear. Sometimes we don't get the answers that we need. Timeliness, involvement, there's misalignment. And to the defense of the sponsors, I gotta say, sponsors are busy people and senior. They know their job, but they're busy. And because they're busy, they have a day job. And then they are also seconded to projects, or they get the title of a project sponsor, right? Absolutely. Thanks, Olga. The roles and responsibilities are not clear, right? By the way, this is a common thing in any type of setting. So I see a lot of friction between project managers and business analysts because there's no clear definition of who does what. I see friction between PMs and change professionals or practitioners because, again, there's no clear boundary, there's no clear understanding of where you end and I begin. And same with the sponsor. So that leads to confusion, to duplication of effort, to gaps, and eventually bad air is being spread into the atmosphere over there between the PM and the sponsor. So back to the defense, the sponsors are busy people. They have a day job, usually senior and demanding, and then they have to sponsor projects. 1, 2, 3, or more. They have a portfolio of projects. All the project managers need their attention, right? And the sponsors just don't have enough capacity to give. Common, understandable, but bottom line, the projects are starved, right, by the sponsor. They don't get the attention and the focus that they need, and then the projects are going sideways and everybody's getting upset. We know the rest. So the bad news, it's not going to change as far as the sponsor's availability or attention span. That are going to remain very limited. The good news, I believe, is that putting some awareness around it, setting some expectations, and working with the sponsor by saying, this is what I need, will allow us to understand where we are. I had situations where I went to my sponsor and my sponsor told me, listen, my door is always open and I'm never going to be there. So let me know what you need and we will take care of it somehow, some way, sometime. I said, that's not good enough. What about if I need you sooner? What about if you're not available? So we delegated some of the responsibility to me. So I was authorized to do stuff that otherwise I wasn't going to. In certain areas, that still are within the mandate that the sponsor gave me, of course. In other situations, and I found it also getting more common in agile environments, where we have an executive sponsor that is really not involved enough, we appointed, or we identified a proxy sponsor. I think I should take credit for that term because I've been using it forever. And all of a sudden I hear it in all sorts of places. A proxy sponsor is somebody, an intermediate in between. It's not a project manager because I'm not authorized, and it's not a sponsor because he or she are not involved enough. So it's somebody appointed by the sponsor with a little bit more seniority and context, and this person will be there for ongoing support and decisions when the sponsor is not available. If it's beyond their pay grade, it's going to the sponsor, but once again, few and far between. So in theory, I would think that when the sponsor leaves, maybe the project actually in theory should end, because at the end of the day, it's the sponsor's job. So that leads me to another thing. I would think that there are two types of sponsors. I'll call them the organic sponsors. This is the sponsor that it's their initiative. They came up with it. They lead it. They're usually more emotionally involved, and definitely they have more context and understanding and care. And then there's the agent sponsor. The agent sponsor, who's somebody who's installed in order to sponsor a project. My concern about the agent sponsor is that he or she do not have the vested interest, they don't have the involvement, they don't have the emotional part, and therefore they're probably going to be less involved, or they're not going to make necessarily the right decisions, which is a different problem. But again, we can see sometimes the original sponsor moves on or gets promoted or leaves for whatever reason, and then a different appointed installed sponsor may not give us the same level of support that we need, let alone maintaining the direction that we have. So putting some context, we have portfolio, governance, all sorts of names. Portfolio management is about the capacity of the organization, understanding what it is that we want to focus on and allocate resources. A function of portfolio management is PMO, right? Supporting the projects, right? But ensuring that higher level goals, objectives are being addressed. Governance, this is where now the sponsor is directly involved, because governance is about decisions, escalations, thresholds, right? How we actually know how we're doing and report and move on. And then sponsorship. This is more about mandate and guidance. And again, don't forget that many times we are not happy with what the sponsor gives us merely because of a gap in expectations. I think the sponsors should conduct themselves in a certain way and they think differently. And again, awareness, mismanagement of expectations, right? Different points of view may lead to those misunderstandings. It's sort of kind of related to the question that we had before, but are there any good things that you can say about sponsors, your experience with sponsors? good sponsors, something that stood out as positive experience? Trust. Thanks, Nicole. So, hey, Nicole, thank you. Trust, right? So when we have trust, things work. Well, I believe that trust, Elizabeth, the breakers, tell me what it means. In the meantime, when we have trust, it's really tiebreakers. Thank you. Yeah, well, that's the role of the sponsor, right? I mean, to make sure that when there is a problem, they rule. But trust is the foundation of any type of performance. We cannot do it without trust, right? But when it's there, like Nicole said, it's great. Fight for the project when they need it. David, this is a great comment. It's not when they need. I think that it's one of the most important roles of the sponsor to fight for the project. It's their project. They can't leave the fight for the project manager to do, because project manager has to look after other things, and also project manager does not have the capacity or the clout in the organization to do that. When you see projects that are deprived of budgets or resources, look up. It may be a sponsorship problem, and even if the sponsor seems to be warm and fuzzy in how they treat things, they may not fight enough, because don't forget that there's always a battle in the organization for resources, and we never have enough. So if they don't fight enough for the project, it will be felt. Can be time for the PM to be mentored. Well, that would be absolutely great. I mean, this is really great relationship, and through the mentoring, I mean, collaboration will come. Ultimate decision maker, that's great when it happens. And then, of course, championship for the project. Thank you. These are great feedbacks. Now, in your environments, what do you think would be one or two more burning things to improve when it comes to sponsorship? Like, if you had the opportunity to sit down with your sponsor and they would actually listen and tell them, you got to do this and that to become a better sponsor, without losing your job, what would it be? Everybody's scared of saying anything. Let's treat this place as Vegas, right? Vegas, whatever happens here stays here. So feel free to tell the truth, right? Like you have been. So Karen says, I developed a lunch and learn for sponsors to learn the role. Karen, this is wonderful, right? And then it's not intimidating, right? It's not it's not confrontational in any way, and it's almost like it creates a center of excellence around it, right? You talk about, and then also it's opportunity for sponsors to express all sorts of concerns and share information. Educate them on roles and responsibilities. Absolutely, roles and responsibilities. If we don't do it up front, and by the way, it applies to the project too, because if in the project I do not set up roles and responsibilities or having a racy chart, I'm up for problems later, because there will be misunderstanding. More engagement, thanks, Elizabeth. And I would actually set it up as much as possible early on and say to the sponsor, let's have regularly occurring touch points, right? I don't want to have a situation that we say, let's meet if we need, and then we end up sometimes not talking, sometimes to weeks at a time, right? This is not healthy. Even if there's nothing active to address, I would like to have those touch points. And then readily available. Well, Liliana, these are, Liliana, hi. These are busy people. They will say, well, call me if you need, but again, readily available. There is a sense of urgency. When we have problems, we must make sure that they are being addressed in a timely manner. Otherwise, there's going to be a chain reaction. And then again, supportive and championing, right? Yeah, basic things that unfortunately, these are areas that we would like to improve. So we know what project sponsorship is. It's an individual, I would hope. Sometimes it's actually a committee, which is a little bit more problematic, because when it's a committee, fingers are pointing and there's never going to be a clear decision. And they are accountable. The buck stops with them. It's their project. I would say they're the single wrinkable neck, right, accountability. Primary concern is to ensure that the project delivers the business value, and essentially it's not pave the way for the PM, just ensure and facilitate that the PM can do his or her job, right? But different stars and different PMs, we will have different sets of expectations. So thank you everyone for the participation. Let's move for a second. When we talk about project failures and project challenges, I'm referring to actually a fairly old research from 2006, which is ancient time, right? I was 10 years old back then, and multiple practitioners talked about a series of things, and forget right now all the others, but let's look at number 2. One major reason for project failures is sponsorship, and they call it AWOL, right? The sponsor does not provide leadership or political clout or time or any energy, right? And we cannot actually move forward. And the bottom line, when my project fails, whether it's defects, failure to complete key scope items, being late, well, obviously being over budget, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. Nobody's going to ask me, hey, by the way, was it your sponsor's fault? Was it your sponsor that didn't give you answers? Was it your sponsor that did not approve resources or release budgets? It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's going to be me. Someone once told me, and unfortunately it was not funny, they said, you know why sponsors get project managers? So there's somebody to blame and to fire at the end, right? Because the sponsor is not going to fire themselves. So here goes the PM. Also, when we look at literature, right? Chaos report, right? I mean, we look at success criteria, we look at project failures, whether it's coming from the PMI, from other organizations, from APMG, all these things point at the need for executive support. It's pretty much consistently at the top 2, if not 3 maybe, but definitely 2 most common factors for success or most common reasons for failure, with others, of course. So I asked that question before, but let's take a look at another set of numbers, because sometimes they're eye-openers. There is some capability gap between what the PM needs and what the sponsor thinks that they give. For example, sponsors frequently motivate the teams. Only a third of the project managers felt that, but over 80% of the sponsors thought they were doing a good job with that. That's a massive gap. Sponsors frequently listen actively or listen at all. Only 42 versus 88. So 42% of project managers said, yes, the sponsor pays attention. 90% of the sponsors felt that they're paying sufficient attention. Sponsors frequently communicate effectively. Again, only half of the PMs thought that, and overwhelming 90% of the sponsors felt they were effective communicators. You know, the first cardinal rule in communications, I cannot attest to my own communications. So I can tell you, hey, listen, I am the perfect communicator, right? But you'll be the judge. I cannot be the judge of my own, right? And then sponsors manage change. Only 37%, right? Very similar to the first one, 82%. So again, big significant gap. I can't blame the sponsors for feeling that they're doing a good job, but unfortunately, it's grossly overstated because less than half of the project managers feel that. Yeah, unfortunately powerful and eye-opening. And again, this is not criticizing. This is not coming to say, hey, you're bad people. The sponsor is understandably busy. And yes, there are many things as project managers that we can do to help that. So talking about partnership, one thing is to do it early as possible, and then regularly occurring touch points, even if they're short, even if there's nothing burning to discuss. Developing that rapport is golden. And I noticed big differences, even within the same environment where I had a sponsor that was very proactive at touching base, just right. And then the guy retired and his replacement, first order of business, she canceled all regularly occurring meetings between all the PMs and the sponsor, right? Oscar, what's the best approach when the sponsor do not attend the status meetings, right? Uh, and they cannot be escalated. Well, there's no best at this point, but I want to set it up front. I want to set the expectation around it, including the sense of urgency. Is it possible that we don't need them in all meetings? It's possible. On the other hand, let's agree that on meetings that we really need them, we're going to have them over there. So I will show respect to their time. And at the same time, they will, well, show respect to their own project. They will be readily available when I need them. So sometimes it's enough just to send them a copy of a report. Sometimes it's to debrief them about something. But if I need them, number one, let's set it up front and let's make sure that they understand the sense of urgency. So why I need them. And by the way, what's going to happen if I don't get the decision from them, right? These are really critical things. Another thing, ask for the sponsor if they can actually give me the support. So I can set an example, for example, expectation upfront. I need a sponsor to be involved X number of times a week plus ad hoc within a certain turnaround time. By the way, in Agile, I'll do it. We work closer with the product owner. I tell the product owner, I need you 3 times a week on the daily meetings, plus, of course, book your schedule for all the sprint planning and of course, the sprint review meetings. The sponsor tells me there's no way I can actually be available so much. I said, okay, let's work about what you can give me, and then let's walk around some sort of a flanking strategy, right? Walk around the situations where you cannot be there. What can we do? Can you delegate the decision-making power to me? Can you get me somebody else? Or we're going to build some sort of a buffer or some sort of a contingency for those things, right? But really, work with the sponsor on alternatives. We said sufficient involvement, delegate some responsibility. We talked about the proxy, right? There's no other way around it. If the sponsor is not there, there are going to be all sorts of issues associated with it. This is just a common generic breakdown of what is expected from the sponsor and from the project manager about day-to-day involvement, funding. And of course, it doesn't mean that it has to happen like that in every organization or in every situation, but definitely let's try to define it. Even if it sort of goes without saying, just to confirm. I find that people are generally not self-starters. So if I give them a clean slate and say, hey, by the way, let's talk about roles and responsibilities, they're going to say, oh, we'll figure it out. I don't know what. On the other hand, if I come to them with that, they say, oh, hold on a second. You're going to be in charge of this, so I'm going to take care of that. Or let's have some protocols about resources, for example, how I'm doing it, how we coordinate, what escalation path we're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. Setting the expectations. This is where it starts. I touched on Agile, right? Just because we work closer with the product owner in an Agile project doesn't mean that the formality should not be there. Doesn't mean that they should not attend as required, right? I've seen many situations where the product owner, unfortunately, busy individual, does not attend sufficiently, does not pay enough attention to what we need from them, and it shows, right? And all Agile projects are very unforgiving. In a waterfall project, I can hide failures for months, right, until the deadline comes. But in Agile, within a week or two, everybody's going to know. And if we do a good job, probably we're going to know about the failures before. So it's not that the role of the sponsor is enhanced, and it's not actually that the product owner is always the sponsor. Depending on the layers, quite often, just like we may have duplications between the PM and the Scrum Master, so we have another person to fight with, we may have both a sponsor and a product owner. One thing, let's get their act together so they don't contradict each other, have seen that. But if we have the two layers, let's make sure that we have the access to the sponsor sufficiently, because the sponsor cannot just be see you later, see you at the end, if they need to sign off on things. So that brings us to that painful. Here are a few types of sponsors. Of course, feel free to tell me if you have encountered them, but we got to be able to do something about those. So we have the butterfly sponsor. The butterfly sponsor is a sponsor who's disengaged. He or she are busy, and butterfly, they are distracted. They cannot be pinned down. You can't get stuff from them on time. It's quite challenging. Of course, I will not be able to know that. I mean, no sponsor will come to me at the beginning of the project and tell, by the way, I'm a butterfly type, right? But that's why I want to set some expectations, some rules of engagement, some touch points, so we can actually work together and make the project progress properly. I've seen also the reluctant sponsor. This is a sponsor that every time you need something from them, they roll their eyes. They're busy people. Why are you coming to me? Don't come to me with problems. Come to me with a solution. I thought I told you that. Again, right? So the reluctant sponsor, I got to be able to develop some rapport, right? Usually, again, come down more in a martial arts form. So again, not confrontational, but rather the opposite, right? Talk about the stakes, identify what it is that they care about, and then address those issues first. Show them the impact of their lack of involvement. Unfortunately, we also have the incompetent sponsor. Well, I cannot send them back to school, and school may not help. The incompetent sponsor, I probably need to do a lot more legwork myself. So a little bit more feeding, right? So to reduce the amount of time that they're involved, because anyway, the involvement is not going to help. But in this case, I just got to get the setup and the permission from them. And essentially, I'm going to show them, I will do that work so you can actually make those decisions. Unlike the butterfly that is just not there, the busy sponsor, legitimately busy. So organize specific touch points and be very sharp and focused with the communications. I think that the last 15 days that we've had since March, right, the 15 days that we've stayed at home, probably have taught us already a thing or two about the need to sharpen communications, right? I mean, with the distance, the lack of interpersonal engagement, and of course the technology, we are learning the hard way, you see, but we're learning the need to really make the communication more pointy, shorter, with less redundancy. So that applies everywhere, but let alone with a busy sponsor, right? They don't have time, so I will, again, it's more legwork for me, but I will engage them in such way that minimizes their volume of involvement, and it will probably, I will probably get the appreciation for that. When the level of seniority is not right, I can't tell them directly, hey, you're too junior, but if the sponsor, and I see it sometimes in agile environments where the product owner is not authorized to make decisions, I just want to open that channel and I want to say, okay, let's work with a more senior individual, right, on those things in order to expedite decision-making process. If the sponsor is too senior, usually you don't get to see them. You got to get a proxy at that point. Closed-minded sponsors, it's their project. Again, as long as what they tell me is legal and ethical, I'm going to go do it. But I just want to make sure that they're aware of the consequences. The meddling sponsor, remember, meddling is another word for micromanaging. And micromanagement is not about us, it's about those who micromanage. So let's keep that in mind, right? Don't take it personally to start with. The second thing, partially we have to accept that because you cannot just change people within a day. And partially we will have to educate them about the sufficient level of involvement. Again, martial arts, talk to them about their availability and how busy they are and how it may be easier if I handle certain situations. I just ensure that I provide them with regularly occurring updates. And then, of course, there's sometimes probably the toughest one to deal with, which is when we have all sorts of incompatible personalities, right? If we don't get along, our only resort is going to be to set up some context and some expectations on rules of engagement. But If there is no chemistry, no rapport over there, this is probably the most difficult one, but maybe open the line of communications and again, keep it professional, right? And make sure that we focus on the merits of what we need to do. But I found that when there is a gap, this is the toughest gap to address. And then we said with awareness, engagement, right? Sometimes ask for empowerment, explain to them the impact. I'll address that comment in a second, and then maintain the right involvement. At the bottom one, I find that in a more tangible way, when we deal with sponsors and they want us to do something, I'm not talking about to do that change and I'm telling them no, but when we see that what they propose is not the right thing, I got to be able to say no while keeping my job. And when I say no, it involves context. So why not? What would be the other thing? When I say to you no, you say do something and I tell you no. Besides telling you why not, what's the other thing I need to tell you? Exactly. Thank you. Well, the reason is the why, thank you. But then options. Options, by the way, is 2 or more, right? Not one option, right? So why not? And what's better? What can we do instead? I can't just dismiss it by saying, no, there must be a better way. I must be able to put it in context, because sometimes what we want to do is the lesser of a few evils. Karen said, you give tasks to the sponsors to do, you keep them involved in the project by assigning them work. This is great, right? It's done very appropriately, right? But yeah, right? They feel involved, they feel included, and it forces them to actually participate. So it's almost like some sort of an occupational therapy, right? not to the full extent, but their tasks are actually, and it's not tasks as in delegating junior stuff to them, it's really things for them to focus on. So a couple of other tips. Look how the time flies. It's almost 2:40. A couple of other things when we talk about sponsors and how to set the expectations, right? First of all, it's back to basics, roles and responsibilities. Let's define what you do and what I do. And it goes beyond any methodology. Whoa. Can you still hear me? Something happened. Am I still in the session? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Uri, we can still hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. It gave me some error message on Zoom and it doesn't let me remove it. Okay.
You have 5 minutes left though, just so you know.
I know. I have the Zoom in the middle of the screen. Anyway, beyond the methodologies, right? So the relationship and the rules of engagement must be there. Let's define how we do that. Let's ensure that we are touching base on a regular basis. Let's define what's important and what's urgent and what's the difference between these things. Identify how we measure capacity, both for the team, resources, right, but for the sponsor, him or herself, and mechanisms to prioritize. And sometimes I'm going to have to do it together with the sponsor, right? Sometimes, even though it's their job. It involves managing up, right? Remember, managing up is gently get them to be involved, draw them in without them realizing what I'm doing so much, right? Because again, managing up is always a very delicate art. And really define a set of expectations for each step on the way, for each stage in the project. Identify what success looks like. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the first thing, right? Success criteria, things like success criteria. If it's not clear, I will not be able to deliver, right? This is, I mean, in everything, we talk about testable when it's features, but success criteria. If I ask you what was the success criteria for the Toronto Maple Leafs in that previous season, I mean, probably it wasn't met, but you know what? Let's set expectations, and then we will know what to aim for, and we will know how to deliver it. And then the tips, really, you see at the bottom of the screen, it's a couple of things. Maybe I can even help the sponsor identify specific questions to ask so they maintain focus, specific things to do to keep the project going, things to look for, right? For signs or for indicators, and of course, things to measure that I'm going to be able to provide them with reports. Other than that, we talked about resources, we talked about identifying the capacity of the sponsor, and that pretty much leaves us with a couple of minutes if you have any additional questions. So to recap, a lot of how sponsorship will look like can be controlled to an extent by the project manager, right? If I set the expectations straight, even if they cannot give me what I need, I can still work with them and then tell them, okay, if you can't give me that, this is how I propose that we're going to work around it. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Does it make sense? I mean, I was trying to keep a lot of information here in 43 minutes. Well, if it made sense, I see a comment. Some said, thank you, appreciate that. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the participation. By the way, when you go on LinkedIn, this is my name, Ori Shibi, and there's something very unique about me that there's only one of me over there. In the past, there used to be others and I took them out. You can also see there's no more room on the screen for my books, so I will stop writing books at this point. And really, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for all those who don't know me, who tolerated me here, and those names that I recognize, double appreciation, because the fact that you came back is very flattering. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day and stay healthy. All the best.